So I'd like to introduce our panel first. We're really pleased today to have Ryan Burgess, who is the Director of the Governor's Office of Workforce Transformation, with us. Of course, Heather McGowan is joining us again to continue our conversation. We have Kenny McDonald, President and Chief Economic Officer at Columbus 2020, and Scot McLemore, Manager of Talent Acquisition with Honda North America Incorporated. So if we could, let's give them a round of applause. So I'm Cheryl Rice. I'm Associate Vice Chancellor of Higher Education and Workforce Alignment with the Ohio Department of Higher Education. And it's my pleasure to have this esteemed group here today to continue the conversation about the future of work and what that means as we think about education and the workforce of today and the workforce of tomorrow. So our key topic, again, is looking at those workforce needs of today and tomorrow. We want to gain from their insight on what key skills we're going to need for the future with our students, especially in this ever-changing environment that we're working within. And we heard a lot of that through the conversation with Heather. Especially with emphasis about work-based learning in that environment and the role of partnerships that are so key with education and business and industry. So I'm going to begin with Ryan. And this is a conversation, and we will have time for questions at the end. So Ryan, in your role, you've traveled the state. You've met with many employers across the state. What are you hearing from our employers around the state about the future of work and the workforce needs?
Well, thanks, Sherry. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see everyone and be up here with Scott and Kenny and Heather. It's an honor to be on the stage with her. She's been one of the biggest influences on me in terms of how we think about this, and I think she's the best at this in the world right now, so it's great to be with Heather. But I guess to take a step back quickly, I think Ohio, one of our greatest strengths is one of our biggest workforce challenges, is that Ohio is so diverse in terms of our communities and the industries that we have, and Governor Kasich has worked hard to try to diversify our economies even more. It's just kind of like a good retirement approach where you want to diversify your portfolio, which we've done. But because of that diversity, the needs that we have.
Yeah, we need to talk right into it.
This better?
Yeah.
That's better. So because of that, the needs that we have, the workforce needs that we have, just cross the spectrum, which makes our jobs in workforce and education that much more challenging. But nonetheless, that is a strength that we have that not a lot of other states have. So with that being said, I would say when I've met with employers all across the state, different shapes and sizes, I would put them into three buckets in terms of how they're thinking about the future of work. The first one, and I would say it's probably the biggest category, are the number of companies that are simply not even thinking about the future of work. That might surprise you. I am surprised many times when CEOs or business owners come in and we ask a lot of these questions, and you can tell they're just not thinking about this. This might not surprise you, but nonetheless, I find it surprising. The second group are those who love to call and complain about workforce. And those are the phone calls that probably a lot of you receive. They want to complain about the skills gap, but I tell everyone, usually the first one or two questions that I ask is, when is the last time you picked up the phone and called the superintendent of your local schools or the president of your local college and university? And more times than not, the response is, I haven't thought of that yet. And my response is, there's not much we can do in Columbus to help you if you're not willing to roll up your sleeves and engage at the local level, because I think workforce is fundamentally a local, regional exercise. And then the final category are those companies who I think get it and are engaging the education system and trying to develop a talent pipeline, and I think we've got a great example up here today with Scott. So those are kind of the broad categories. The other big challenge that I think when they are thinking about the future of work, they're thinking about kind of their existing employee base that they have, and a lot of companies are trying to transform. And the one example that I give, I think it's one of the better examples, is AT&T. I mean, they're trying to go from cables to the cloud. They're trying to transform their entire workforce, and they've partnered closely with Udacity, and I'm sure a lot of you read with that. But even locally here, you probably read nationwide. just announced they're going through a massive restructuring. They're trying to figure out what the insurance industry is going to look like. AEP has 4,000 retirements in the next handful of years. So that's when I hear it, it's about what are we doing with our existing employee base. And then in terms of the skills, what are they looking for? Whatever term you want to use, soft skills, professional skills, life skills, that's a part of every conversation we have, and everybody defines that a little bit differently. But that's kind of the common feedback that I hear and I see.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to move on to Heather and ask a follow-up, and this is a continuation from her earlier talk. So one important consideration of the future of work is the notion of continuous or lifelong learning. The idea is the skills needed in the workplace will change more quickly than the traditional forms of education and training. Tell us more about how important it is creating this culture of continuous learning with the future of higher education.
Sure. So we have this kind of model that I mentioned in my talk that, you pick a future self and then you work towards that self and we codify and transfer these skills and then you're done. That doesn't work anymore. So how do we think differently about it so that we are always asking, what did you learn today? Did you fail? What did you learn from failing? Instead of asking for good answers, start asking for good questions. You gotta get into these people's minds an inquiry-based mindset, an idea that they're gonna have to learn for life, so that it's not the result you got on the exam, it's that great question you asked when you did that project. I had the good fortune of being here a little early yesterday, and I got to go see the PAST Foundation. How many of you guys have been to the PAST Foundation? Every single one of you in this room should go to the PAST Foundation. That, to me, is the future of work. It is a lab that helps infuse changes to education. It brings industry and education together. It's maybe 20 minutes from here. We took an Uber there. You can do it. You're in Ohio. They've been doing it for 18 years. They are looking at not just STEM education, they do Tai Chi, they have a food learning lab. They are an inquiry-based lab that helps change education. It helps train teachers. It has students who go through there. Students get college credit for some of the things they work on. They are not a degree granting or credit granting institution. They're just a lab that looks at the changes in the world, and they have constantly this flow of amazing projects. So to me, the future work looks like that. I just happened to be here yesterday and got to see it, so there's something you guys can all do. Go see the PAST Foundation, P-A-S-T. It's right here in your state, and it's amazing. It's one of the best things I've seen in the country.
Great, thank you. Kenny, I'm going to turn to you if I could. You deal with economic development, bring businesses into the Columbus area or around the region within Ohio. From your vantage point, what are you hearing from the business community on the workforce needs of the future? What are you hearing?
So first of all, great to be in the room with partners around the state in the most important topic in economic development, which is a talented, growing, and inclusive workforce. And it is a subject of probably 60% of my days these days talking to companies. So virtually all we do at our team is we're meeting with companies in our region and around the world, and we're meeting with communities about supporting those companies and how they can support them now and in the future. And I'll just talk about maybe a few things. It is obviously a huge topic because the pressure and the pain is more severe than most of our employers have had in the last 30 or 40 years. And there's a bunch of different reasons for that. We have obviously a big demographic change in the country and the world. As Ryan was talking about, we have a number of companies, Honda, AEP, others that have sort of these waves of retirement and a lot of knowledge and skill walking out of the door on one end. And then enormous, what I would call global pressures that are based in technology, right? Technology is changing every day in every industry, in every small, mid-sized, big company we have. They're under equal pressure. Enormous pressure around changing and adapting technology to fit new business models and stuff. Second is the economy's changing pretty radically. Actually your business model, how you make money is changing, and work has to change with that, right? And then finally, again, is the demographic change that we're seeing. Just a kind of a massive influx and a perfect storm around these things, right? So they're feeling pressure and wondering what's next. And at the same time, they may be having record years at this point, right? So I talk to a lot of companies these days. They might be local, private, family-owned companies, or they might be, you know, kind of a behemoth that we might be trying to recruit to the state or something. They're all, you know, kind of they're people that run these companies, by the way, not robots. And so what they're feeling is, my competitor is doing this faster than me. I'm worried about the future of my industry, and I can't change fast enough, but I don't know quite what to do. And that's met with either head in the sand and paralyzation, right? Like, it's so daunting that I'm gonna just kind of grind it out and see if I can get a little bit more out of the turnip for the next few years and have a couple of great years and maybe not address some of the workforce challenges that I have. You have other companies like Honda. I would use Nationwide. What Nationwide did this week is really interesting. So, you know, they announced, several of the insurance companies actually have recently done this around the country. Nationwide had announced 1,100 people around the country. Here in Columbus, it'll impact about 300 people. But also go out and look at their recs. They have 320 open positions at the same time, right? So they have more open positions than people they're letting go. And it's the perfect example of, they've spent about $1 billion in this transformation. And a lot of time on looking at the future work. They're moving forward, and they're doing it in good times so that they can actually be well positioned in the next 4 or 5 years, right? So we have people that are doing it. My greatest worry is for the small, mid-size, Ohio-based company that is, again, probably having a fairly, good run here, and that is pushing off some of these things. And my wish is that they would automate and they would address these business model challenges faster and faster. The faster we deal with them, the more we can move on, and the whole state can actually be more competitive in the future. Maybe one final thing is, it's enormously positive. We have, if we can get at this problem and unlock some of the capacity that we have sitting on the sidelines, and that's why I'm going to keep talking about inclusion today, because we have a lot of people that are actually, I'm not worried about your students. You know, they're generally well equipped. I'm worried about the young man, young woman in the Linden neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, that is going to get excited about the future of work and where they're going to have an opportunity to make a career and kind of change even a generational trajectory for them. But we have growth possibilities here. Our pipeline could not be fuller. We're going to have companies not only in Central Ohio but around the state that want to do things here. And we actually have companies right now that are not going ahead with employment opportunities because of some of these challenges we're talking about. They're holding things on the sideline. And they know they can't do them here maybe right now, but they also know they can't do them in other communities. So they're kind of punting right now. We got a lot of growth to unleash if we actually figure some of this workforce stuff out. So I applaud the work of everybody in the room, especially Ryan, and the work that the Governor Kasich and his team have done this last several years to address some of these issues.
Great, thank you. Scott, I'm going to turn to you. You're in talent acquisition at Honda. You've been doing this for a long time. So in your role, your position at Honda, what are some of the top anticipated changes that you're seeing in this sector and that you're forecasting for the future as well?
Sure. Sherry, thank you very much for offering Honda an opportunity to share what we're doing in this space. Heather teed it up so wonderfully with what she presented that it'll be easy for me to explain kind of where we are and what we see going forward. So I think to answer your question, there are 3 key areas. I have notes, so I'm going to use those because I don't want to mess this up. One area that she touched upon is the rapid change of technology, both for Honda in our product, and those of you that own Hondas, which I hope there are many, would, especially if you have a recent product purchase, there's inclusion of sensing devices, primarily around safety for driver and pedestrians. So that technology, where we have a combination of electronic, Internet of Things, where it's connected to the internet, coupled with mechanical, that integration of technology is changing very rapidly. And then as well as the as well as the equipment side. So I've been with Honda, it'll be 29 years here in January. I was an engineer, I started as an engineer in the company back in 1990, and the robots that we used, I give this example, were hydraulic robots. Today, those robots are not hydraulic robots. They are powered by electronics and servo devices. So that technology is completely different than the technology that I engaged when I came on at Honda. And that's continuing to change because now there are sensing devices with cameras and they're connected to one another. There's even exploration, as some of you may know, where those robots can sense when a human is in that space so that we don't have to have safety guards, but that safety is there. So there's all kinds of things that are changing. That technology is driving the skill sets that are needed for those that are coming in. But as Heather pointed out, it's also driving the need for us to continue to provide learning opportunities for our incumbent workforce. The second one is the influence of the consumer marketplace. Again, she touched on this, so some of you may have heard about Ford's partnership with Walmart. We have a partnership with Amazon, so that influence of the consumer marketplace on specifically the automotive industry is driving some changes as well. I don't even know what that looks like, to her point of some of these new opportunities. And then obviously electrification and autonomous vehicles is another change that we in the automotive industry are working with, and we forecast changes in the future with that.
Absolutely, and I think some of the key themes that we're hearing is increase in technology, automation, all of this brings about a level of disruption. So in your all's roles, how can we adjust to the disruption or work around this disruption? And what kind of lessons learned from an educational standpoint should we be thinking about and to be able to serve that? Ryan, I'll start with you. Or Heather.
The first thing we need to remember is these are tools. And we created tools to serve humans, not the other way around. So this whole rise of the robots thing, I think, is a little misplaced. Tools need humans. So we ought not lose place of that. And one of the things we're trying to do in education is prepare the next workforce. So what we're trying to do is create the next taxpayers. And so how do we keep focused on creating the next taxpayers and leverage technology in learning, leverage technology for productivity, leverage technology for greater insights, but not lose sight of the fact that this is in service to humans.
A few thoughts, I guess, how to deal with this disruption is just this group, this leadership group across the state, being willing and embracing change. Sounds simple, but it's really, really difficult. Engage your business community across this state. Just put this challenge on the business community. Because trust me, they like to call all of you out. Call them out. How are they engaged? How are you working with them? Go visit with them. Go understand what their needs are, because this, the first question you asked is trying to identify the needs. It's very difficult. It is a difficult exercise. And when you have these conversations with employers, you'll find they have a hard time articulating what they need. It goes back and forth from kind of the soft skills conversation to the technical skills. But I think your expertise, I think you can go to them and help them try to figure this out. Now, I do think it's going to be interesting over time where to see our companies going to embrace technology or data to better understand the needs and how they can react to the disruption in the economy. And how I always try to frame this is who has a Facebook account in the room? A good number. And we know here over the last 6 months with Mr. Zuckerberg being pulled in front of Congress what they've been doing with your data. But if you go back even a few more years, they had to change the privacy settings because of an algorithm that was developed that with 70 of your likes, so you go out and you like a picture of your neighbor's dog, with 90% probability they could determine your sex, your race, sexual orientation, religion, and party affiliation. That is the power of machine learning and data. So there are a lot of firms out there right now trying to figure out how to take people's digital footprints. Google knows everything about you. Amazon knows everything about you. Is there a constructive way that you can start to take some of that data, understanding people's passions and interests, and match them up with a good job? Because I say we're in a matching society where Netflix, you name it, dating sites, we can match you to anything you're looking for. But we're still not very good at matching people to jobs. So I'm really curious to see how technology over time starts to figure for that. The accreditation process, you all understand this far better than I, but I know enough to see that, and Heather was saying this, so how can we possibly react to the changes in our economies and our jobs when it takes all of you a couple years to approve a new program? It's nuts. It's nuts. So I would ask you to challenge that process as you go forward. So that's how I would kind of frame how we address the disruption.
I could say how we're thinking about it as a service provider in economic development, which is, and I would put the challenge also to the group and to our business leaders the same way. There's going to have to be a lot more intervention than ever before. So the way I've been thinking about it, I always use Honda as an example. It's such a huge part of our economy. It's not one company. It's hundreds of companies that are in their supply chain that are part of our central Ohio economy. I don't want to take the risk that Honda or their suppliers may or may not actually get over the river, right? If we're going to, make different types of vehicles, we're going to become a mobility company, more and more so, and not just, 20 years ago it was a sedan maker, and we can no longer just take a risk and say, well, I hope they make it, right? It is all out intervention to say, what can we do for you, right? And how do we actually intervene and say, we can do it? I'm more and more convinced every time we have that conversation with almost every company we have all kinds of programs and tools and smart people to actually deliver the services that are required, but we're increasing, we just don't connect the dots all the time. And companies like Honda say, we'll accept the help. That's the challenge for a company to say, and it's hard for a company like Honda, right? Great global company, to say, yeah, we'd like some help, and to move forward. Once they do that, that unleashed a lot of stuff, partnerships with Columbus State, all kinds of things. Too few of our companies do that. And they say, we got this. And we're like, we might say something, but we don't really want to let people in the door. We almost have to kind of kick the door down and say, we're going to help. We're going to make sure that this actually happens. And so we're thinking about that and no longer just going out and saying, how you doing? But it's like, hey, we're looking at what your competitors are doing overseas or in the next state over. And we're wondering how you're going to address this issue. And we have a vehicle or two that delivers this. Can I connect you? Can I put you in touch? Can I drive them to your doorstep? Right? And by the way, here's an intern to help you implement some of this and spend some time on it. So we're really thinking about how we actually have to be more of a consultant and a counselor and an intervener in this process than just a simple, community cheerleader going forward.
Great. Scott?
Yeah, there are 2 points I want to make. To go to what Heather pointed out in terms of addressing economic disparity in that population, and specifically what Kenny just mentioned a little bit ago about connecting with students and young people in economic disadvantaged areas. So Honda, as part of what I do and my passion, a part of a STEM Industry Council for Columbus City Schools. And in general, what we're trying to do is we're trying to reach everyone in all of the populations. But I think this need to engage and collaborate differently is very important to our success. So we are, as an example, providing opportunities for career readiness and internship opportunities for high school students from Linden and other schools in Columbus City that have STEM programs. Part of that is resume writing, personal statement, mock interview, and then they have a summer internship program, and we're in partnership with Columbus State on this, where they can receive badging through this process. But it's going to be important for our survival to engage all populations because we're not going to make it without diverse thought, skills, and talent, and without reaching out to more people within the population to make them ready to learn and work. So that's one thing. The other thing, and now I forgot what I was going to say. The other area, so it was that engagement, and I completely forgot that second point. But it'll come back to me. But I am proud to say that Honda is a supporter of the PASS Foundation. Just wanted to mention that. So very, very good stuff.
Sure, I do. I want to take on something Scott said. And as Heather illustrates, automation technology, all these changes are going to impact everyone. But from a public policy perspective, to what Scott was saying, when you think about the state of Ohio, there's 700,000 adults without a high school degree, 900,000 adults, give or take, that have some college but didn't complete, 1.8 million Ohioans that have just a high school degree. From a public policy position, that population, we have to reach them. We have to reach them. And that could create new opportunities for all of you. How can you partner with somebody to reach that population? Because the reskilling, the upskilling, the continuous learning that we need across the state, what role are all of you going to play with that population? Because those are the individuals who are going to probably sooner than later be impacted by automation technology. Recognizing that everybody will face these changes, but that's the population from a public policy perspective. The governor always talks frequently, the way he puts it, is what are we doing to help the 52-year-old woman about to send two children to college. She just lost her job, no fault of her own. How do we help that person pivot to a new industry, to a new job? How do we reach those individuals?
Sherry, I remembered what I was going to say.
Okay.
Thanks, Ryan. I don't know how I forgot this. A very important part of what we're doing at Honda and working with several of you here in the audience is providing the sensing of what those changes are that are taking place in our business and the technology around that. And then collaborating with those in your faculty and staff to incorporate not just new technology, but again, what Heather was talking about is interdisciplinary or cross-functional learning that needs to happen. So as we move from this mechanical-based, as an example, mechanical-based manufacturing model to this integration of electronics and the Internet of Things, we're recommending students have some networking and computer science understanding foundational skills coupled with the mechanical design and those concepts as well, because they're going to need all of that when they come into the workforce to be able to learn and continue to grow within the organization.
And Scott, I'd just like to continue with that theme. Honda's a great partner with education entities all over, and you mentioned the internships, the activities that you have at Honda where you do integrate education in the workplace. We have to talk about the importance of work-based learning.
Yep.
And how these partnerships with business and industry are so critical. Could you just speak more about the power of work-based learning?
Absolutely. It's becoming more and more important for us to provide students with those opportunities to develop the technical skills, but also, again, to Heather's point, those human skills. So we have 4 areas of work-based learning that I'll describe again. I'm going to use my notes. So engineering and business internships, the most traditional one I would say that Honda has for 4-year college students. We offer those 13-week opportunities. Secondly, engineering technology internships for students at two-year colleges. Again, traditional, for the most part for Honda, we've had that for a long time. Part of our challenge has been historically that we cannot, those students are non-traditional students working already a full-time job. It's difficult to get them away from that full-time job to have a work experience at Honda. So we worked with Columbus State to design a work-study model where students can work 3 days a week at Honda while continuing classwork 2 days a week at the college, and we're working on expanding that with other colleges. There are other models like that across the state that have been very effective in different areas. So that's one that's been successful for us. At this point, we've hired, I believe, 85% of those students have come to Honda. Those that haven't have gone on to other locations. Sometimes our suppliers have been very successful. And we'll put a plug in right now. WOSU Rivet podcast is an example of this. You'll see a young woman, her name's Erica Miller. Please check that out. That's an example of what I'm talking about, someone that's been successful in that model. And then lastly, the most recent is high school job shadowing internships. So we've had a few students that have job shadowed, and then now we're partnered with the Marysville Early College High School in collaboration with Ohio High Point Career Center out of Bell Fountain, where we have students working, high school students working in our operations in technical roles. So it's really important for us as we're faced with a high number of potential attrition with retirement, and that the importance, again, of what Heather mentioned in terms of that knowledge sharing from those that are long tenured within our organization and working with younger, either full-time potential associates and people, or those that have entered the workforce with us full-time. And we're trying to figure out good ways of doing that. We have a knowledge sharing group that's developed an infrastructure where that information can be stored. But one of the things that I want to add is that, as you all know, young people are expecting that, and we're not doing it well. We're doing it, but we're not doing it well. We need to really work on that, what that looks like. I am part of the Ohio Manufacturing Association Sector Partnership. So one last area that we're talking about, for those of you that don't know, through Ohio TechNet, there's a $12 million Department of Labor grant for IRAP, Industry Recognized Apprenticeship Program. And Honda is a part of that for the Central Ohio region. We have a sector partnership here in Central Ohio that I'm a part of. And that is another way that we're going to be able to pull students in. What I really like about that, and again, I'm going to go to what Heather showed in that model where people move in and out of learning while they're working. This model, this IRAP model, is based on that concept. There's a gentleman from NIMS, Montez King, who presented at our summit that we had November 1st, that spoke exactly, gave an example of exactly what Heather described in terms of what that needs to look like in the future for industry to be successful with continuing to skill and offer learning opportunities to people. So.
That's great. Thank you very much. And we talk about the importance of work-based and that sector strategy approach that we've been using across the state. Many sectors are asking, where's the experiential learning process so that these individuals come with some level of experience, and it's really become more of the expected as opposed to it's a nice thing to have. Okay? Okay. So in just thinking about the readiness of our graduates, the work-based learning opportunity, thinking about how education can also pivot to help build into these practices. Can you just speak a little bit more about the importance of these models in education and things for us to think about moving forward? So, Heather.
Can you reframe that question? I'm sure I understood it.
So looking at all the, from a business perspective, how can education learn from the expectations that business is asking for, helping to prepare the readiness of our graduates to meet the workforce needs of today and for tomorrow?
I think we need to break apart the pipeline. So if you think you're in the market for just 18 to 22-year-olds, you're headed straight towards obsolescence. I think you need to start thinking about yourself as having an open door, one door for students, one door for industry, and that they come in all the time. Industry comes in, students come in. Industry come in, all age students. I think that the idea of this sort of becoming educated in the first third of your life and what are those skills they need to have so they enter the workforce, it's great. What are the skills they need to have to stay in the workforce? How are they going to deal with job loss? How are they going to deal with their shifting identity? How are they going to keep learning? How are businesses? Businesses are going to need help too. We take two businesses side by side. Let's take Amazon and Barnes & Noble. If can you see Barnes & Noble winning Academy Awards? There's nothing that Amazon does that you can't imagine them doing. Because of the way they've organized themselves, they continuously learn and adapt. And the businesses that are going to thrive are going to be the ones who do that. Some of them may do it inside their companies. Many of them will need partnerships. So we need to break apart this two separate boxes. Here's the education, here's work. We need to tear down that wall.
Great, thank you. Anyone else on the panel have thoughts?
Well, increasingly, I've said this before in a bunch of talks that I give, I want to make sure everybody in the room is thinking about this. How many of your students are actually staying in Ohio, and for how long, and what are they doing? When we ask that question, we get actually kind of interesting answers or non-answers. We've done our own research on it as an economic development group for the maybe 12 to 13 institutions we have across Central Ohio. And I know you're not educating students only for Ohio jobs. I get it. But it's really an interesting thing to look at because there are great career opportunities here. And when we have really low, we have some schools with really low number of people staying for up to a couple of years, it begs the question, like, what are we doing? How come those students don't know? Did they not get an internship? Did they not get connected to the local community? Do they not understand the companies that are at their doorstep, right? And that's the kind of stuff that we're thinking about. We've seen big jumps, by the way. I'll use the Columbus College of Art and Design. Had about a 30% jump in the number of students that are actually staying in the market over the last several years. Why? Because their students are really diverse and they think differently, and they're not just getting hired to be a fashion designer at Abercrombie & Fitch now, but they're going to work at Safelite, and they're working on a data analytics team because that different thinking that they have. It isn't about coding all the time or having the tech skills. Those kids can learn the tech skills. It is the different way that some of those students think that is valued and increasingly valued by companies that you wouldn't think so, including Honda and a bunch of other people. So that begged the question, and we're monitoring this stuff all the time. Some of it is logical. Some of it just actually can actually be addressed and turned around a little bit. Because one thing I ask is let's engage all of our potential workers in Ohio, and we need more of them. Okay? If we, through our Amazon process, if we had doubled or tripled every computer science program in the state, that would meet the existing demand without Amazon. That's the demand we have already that we can't meet. That's why Nationwide has 320 open positions, and just down the street at JP Morgan Chase, there's about 200, and they can't fill their internships every year. Like, what are we doing? We gotta get after that. There are opportunities here.
Thanks for reminding me that my daughter's a computer science major. I need to have her talk to them, actually, if they're interested. So, again, back to something that Heather mentioned that kind of clicked with me. So, 2 points. She mentioned something about how faculty at the colleges engage students around identity and the things that they want to learn, need to learn, and something that I've had conversations about with our college partners is around career services. So I think we need to rethink and work together, collaborate. From an industry perspective, we have a responsibility as well to work with our educational partners to educate students about what the opportunities are, what they look like. Another thing that I don't think Honda does well, again, she pointed this out as something that's important, is my takeaway was branding from our standpoint. Everyone knows what our product is. I always say it's like Willy Wonka, right? Willy Wonka factory. The product, the candy bar, everybody knows about it, but doesn't know what goes on inside those four walls. We need to do a better job of talking about our culture, what the associate experience is like, what value someone can add to our organization. Does that connect with them? We don't do a good job of that, but I think in this collaboration with educational institutions around that and changing up the career services model and working with the faculty and school as a whole, we can educate all those students about what that opportunity looks like. You don't have to be an engineer to come at Honda. We have all kinds of opportunities. I started as an engineer in the company, now I'm an HR manager, and the path in there is very complicated. So there are all kinds of things that we can do around educating those that are wanting to learn and engage and become part of the workforce.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to let people have a moment to ask their questions as well. But I also wanted to just kind of go through the key themes and so automation, be agile, be attentive, be engaging, be a partner, looking at the future of work and all those elements of lifelong learning and continuous learning. I think that we have great takeaways today for lessons learned that we can really go back to our universities and our colleges and have some good conversation. While we're getting ready to tee up for questions, let's give the panel a big round of applause. Are there questions?
Hi, thank you. Ryan, I think you mentioned a little bit about the accreditation aspect, and so with that burden as far as staying ABET accredited as a university, as a community college, how, I guess, with that burden and making it so challenging to, change, essentially, how do we prepare this workforce, the future students of this workforce, strategically? So how do we stay ABET accredited, of course, but also change it? So like the practical aspect, because me personally, I'm an engineering student, so I have to take classes such as calculus, chemistry. So how are we practically changing these class settings to make it a change for the future?
Where do you go to school, did you say?
I'm a student trustee at the University of Akron.
Oh, very good. It's been mentioned a number of times. It's been mentioned a number of times so far, is how can we do a better job of getting you out of the classroom, which that's important, but how do we get you out of the classroom and into a company, working with someone where you can start to apply what you're learning, and where you're starting to develop those soft skills, those professional skills, those life skills. I think that's where we have a lot of room for opportunity, and Scott was just kind of speaking to that a little bit. I think that's one way that we can change them. And a lot of our initiatives, our policy initiatives over the last 8 years have had to do with that. How do we engage? How do we get business and education to collaborate? Because I'll say it again, we challenge the business community as much as we challenge the education community. But go to them. You do not need to shoulder this entire burden of transforming education. You need to work with your business leaders in your local community to change the way education looks across our state. I do have to get this in. Who's heard of the Ohio Means Jobs Readiness seal? Okay, all right, you just made my day. A good number. But what this is a recognition in terms of how important soft skills are. There's 15 competencies that a high school student, if they demonstrate them, and they go find 3 mentors. It can be a coach, it can be a priest, it can be a teacher. They can find 3 mentors who can basically validate that that young person is exhibiting those soft skills. They, at graduation, they get a seal on their diploma, and it goes on their transcript. We made a big push to engage businesses across the state to endorse this, because That's what they were saying. We need young people that have these soft skills. Now, if I had to do it over again, we would have pushed equally within higher ed for all of you to endorse this, and a number of you have, and I would, if you haven't, I would encourage you to contemplate this, because the 15 competencies that are going to make somebody successful in work are the same competencies that's going to make you successful on a college campus as well, work ethic being one of them. So I needed to put that out there, or my colleague Emily wouldn't let me forget it, but please look into that if you've not heard the Ohio Means Jobs Readiness Seal. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Do you, and so let me ask you, do you have a sense of the opportunities, the career opportunities in Akron?
So at the University of Akron, I feel as though we have a co-op program, of course. So as an engineering student, that's one of the big reasons, of course, why I chose the University of Akron. And so there is a lot of opportunity. I also think that it takes the proactiveness of a student as well to actually look at the opportunities that are available. So I would say yes, that's absolutely.
Good. And by the way, speaking of Akron, so this is kind of a K-12 example, but what David James is doing there with the Ford Next Generation Learning Academy, he's starting to infuse kind of business and education within the curriculum, and I think it's a wonderful example, and he is exposing his students to all the opportunities that are in Akron. So.
Other questions for our panel? Again, I thank you very much to the panel for your insights and your words of wisdom, and I'm sure that we will be able to take a lot of this information back to our campuses. Thank you very much.